Now, there are two main varieties of cocoa powder, Dutch processed cocoa powder and natural cocoa powder. And you guys are asking, what's the difference between the two? And if my recipe calls for one over the other, can I substitute? So today I'm going to share with you some tricks and tips and all sorts of good information regarding cocoa powder. In front of me here, I have the two main varieties, Dutch process, which is right here, and natural cocoa powder. Now, cocoa powder, where is it from? Well, what you start with initially is the cocoa beans. The cocoa beans are fermented, dried, roasted, and then cracked into cocoa nibs. Now, those cocoa nibs are then ground up to extract the cocoa butter, you guys, and then what's left over from that cocoa butter is then dried out and ground into a powder, and that ultimately will yield you cocoa powder. So it's a complicated process, but if you're curious, you guys should look up more information because it is such an interesting thing. Now, once that powder is created, then we get into the two varieties. Natural, which is the one I have here, meaning just that it's not treated at all. Now, natural cocoa powders are really interesting and diverse based on the brands that you might buy. They'll have slightly different flavors, but the chocolatey flavor is really pure with a natural cocoa powder. So if you're using it in a recipe, the chocolatiness will be more prominent than if you were using Dutch process, which has a mellow flavor. Now, Dutch processed cocoa powder is treated with an alkali solution, which neutralizes the pH of the cocoa powder. Now, cocoa powder in general, chocolate in general, has a high level of acidity, and acidity in baking reacts with leaveners. So you have to be careful if you have a recipe that calls for one or the other. An even substitution isn't always the case. Now, if your recipe calls for natural cocoa powder, but you're substituting Dutch process because that's all you have in your house, you need to add a little pinch of cream of tartar, a little bit of acidity to help react with the leavener that might be in the recipe. Now, if you wanted to switch it up, if it was vice versa, and your recipe called for Dutch process, but all you had was natural cocoa powder, you have to add a little bit of baking soda to neutralize the natural acidity that lives in this version here. Now, if you were curious to know, okay, what's going to be the difference in the end product of my baked good? Well, it really has to do, again, with that chocolatey flavor and also the color. Now, in front of me here, I have two cupcakes that are baked. One is baked with the Dutch process and one is baked with the natural. And you can see the Dutch process one here, I'm going to break it open, has a really dark brown, almost black color to it, compared with the natural cocoa powder cupcake, which has a more reddish tone to it, but it will have a chocolatey or richer flavor to it. You can kind of see it here side by side, the color differential. Follow those tricks and tips if you guys want to substitute. You might have to add a pinch of baking soda here or a pinch of cream of tartar there. So there you go, guys. I hope I've helped you out. Now you know what cocoa powder is, the two main varieties.